One of the ways Ajahn used to speak about the Dhamma was going against the grain, which is a good principle that has many applications. One example is in the process of meditation, we're trying to balance between energy and samadhi. If you've got lots of energy but your focus isn't very good, your mind's not settled, then the desire in the mind is to look for distraction. You get restless. You want to do stuff. You have to go against that grain of desire. And at that time when the mind is restless, it's most important to subdue it by being very still, keeping quiet, being still, not going out through the senses and looking for things to amuse or divert the mind. In the case of having a relatively high level of samadhi or focus, but no energy, the mind tends to dullness and sleepiness and becomes kind of a hypnotic, is sinking into a stupor, a dreamy stupor, and the desire at that moment is just to be comfortable and kind of slouch over and wrap yourself in a warm blanket and just kind of be dozy. But that's the time you have to fight that and rouse the energy and go against that desire and do something to energize yourself. Make sure you're sitting straight, or if it's really bad, get up and walk, or even do something more vigorous, and not be so worried about distracting the mind at that moment, but paying more attention to quieting the energy level. Another application of the idea of going against the grain is going against the grain of worldliness. Very often what the world values is the opposite of what's really good for Dhamma. The world looks for excitement and diversion and thrills, and these things disturb and agitate the mind. The much higher value is found in peace, peacefulness. Santi is peace. Contentedness is santuti, being content, being at peace. And when the mind is not at peace, it's agitated with the defilements of desire, anger, ill will, worry. All these things confuse and agitate the mind. There's a really neat set of similes for the 5 hindrances, comparing the mind to a bowl of water. The Buddha often uses imagery of water in similes and analogies. And the mind that's still and at peace, the calm mind, is like a bowl of clear, undisturbed water. And it's clean and pure and clear. A person can look and see to the bottom of the bowl without any problem. The mind is completely open, clear in that way. If the mind is agitated by desire, it's like throwing colored dye into the water. It makes a pretty color, but you can't see to the bottom. So the mind is confused in that way. It's filled with desire. If the mind is disturbed by anger or ill will, the defilement of biyapada, and it's like boiling water. You boil water, it froths and bubbles and is disturbed, and you can't see clearly through it. Sloth and torpor is like having pond scum growing on the surface of the water. It obscures the water. It's like a heavy weight, and the water's dark underneath. Anxiety is like the water is stirred up by the wind, so it has ripples in it, and you can't see clearly through it. I'm not remembering the kind of water that's inflicted with skeptical doubt. I'm doubtful about what to say. There is an analogy for that one too, but it's not coming to my mind. So the virtue of the clear mind is when all these defilements are absent. This is actually the prerequisite for jhana. In the state of jhana, there's these particular 5 defilements in Avarna are not present. So they have to be calmed out so the mind can be clear and unclouded. I think that's the analogy for skeptical doubt. Is the bowl of water is dirty, it's clouded, it's not pure. But in any case, this is something very much to be sought for. You know? It's also to be considered that in the different types of feeling tone that can be associated with the mind, we have negative feeling, unpleasant feeling, neutral feeling, and pleasant feeling. And unpleasant feeling is always associated with unskillful states of mind. And of the other 2, they can be skillful or unskillful depending on circumstances and object. But there's a sense in which the neutral mind, which is marked by equanimity, when it's awake and clear equanimity, then this is higher than pleasant feeling. It's spiritually more potent. And we see that in the progression of the jhanas. From the feelings evolved as one deepens in samadhi, from the rapturous feelings of piti to the calm, peaceful bliss of sukha. Finally, in 4th jhana, sukha is abandoned and one knows upekkha. It isn't just a simple neutrality of feeling, it's a profound peacefulness. And this is the same in the vipassana sequence. When the mind has gone through all the various stages, and some of them can be difficult and tumultuous, the mind finally settles into the place of equanimity about formations, which is said to have many blessings. And it's a calm, clear, fully awake state, but it's beyond not only sadness but also happiness. The mind is neither happy nor sad in the strict sense of the term. It's equanimous. It's calm and peaceful. And this valuing of peacefulness is something to take into every facet of our lives. That we find ourselves in this, whatever particular situation we are at this moment is a particular facet of samsaric becoming, which is multitudinous, as we know, and there's many different stations and situations within samsara, and every individual being is in some sense unique. There's a particular convergence of causes from the past and situations in the present converging to make this situation where you are right now at this moment with this particular mix of happiness and suffering. And a good portion of that, one of the major contributing factors, is our own karma, that we have made choices in the past that have brought us to this particular situation. And whatever occurred in the past is done and over and fixed and cannot be changed. And the future is not yet determined, although we can influence it by our decisions now. But the only thing we have real immediate control over is this present moment. You know, how are we reacting to the situation? A good analogy is like playing cards. You're playing a card game like whist or whatever that involves a mix of skill and luck. And your karma from the past is the hand of cards you've been dealt. You can't change that, but how you play the cards is up to you in this moment. You know? However we go forward, whatever decisions we make, actions we take, they're going to be more skillful, more effective if they're coming from a place of calm, clear reflection. The mind is lucid, bright, and not disturbed by defilements. In the Vinaya texts, there is some discussion about the bhikkhus when they come together to make decisions. And they're to avoid making decisions based on the 4 factors of greed, anger, confusion, or fear. And I think that can be extended very well to a general principle. When we make our decisions about our life and things that we're going to do or not do, we should first of all examine our mind and make sure that we're coming from a good place, and avoid decisions made from these factors of greed, anger, fear, and confusion. As a kind of a side note, I've reflected in the past how poorly people make decisions and important decisions based on these factors, and marketers and politicians know this. And if you watch when the politicians are appealing for votes, how often they're playing on your greed, your anger against some other group, or your fear of them, or just general confusion, just throwing up nonsense and hoping something sticks. So we try and find this place, this calm, clear, and there's another way of describing it would be being centered, well-centered, not being caught by these formations that are sprung up from the defilements, not being overwhelmed by the formations, the external formations and the internal formations. To remember, first of all, that this is samsara and it's supposed to hurt. It's just the way things are, and it's never going to be perfect. There's never going to be any situation within samsaric existence when you're not facing difficulties of some kind or another. In whatever birth, whatever place, you may have respite, temporary respite, and may even have eons of respite if you're born in the Brahma realm, but you're going to come back to, that's a very rare state, relative, and you're going to come back to the more ordinary state. Yeah? And this particular human condition is considered a very fortunate one. It's very rare and difficult to take a human birth. So if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by your difficulties, just take solace in the fact that, at least I have a human existence. It's something we take for granted, and we tend to think that there's lots of humans, and most of the people we know are human, so it's something we take easily for granted. But if you just even consider the amount of lower animal forms on the planet, let alone all the other realms of existence, just consider all the insects and worms and things. That the odds of being a human being are very remote, very small. The Buddha said it's like the blind tortoise at the bottom of the ocean who comes up for air once in 100 years. And if he happens to put his head through a yolk that's floating on the surface of the sea on one of those occasions, that's like the odds of taking a human rebirth. There is a kind of general principle in samsaric becoming that the lower realms are more populous than the higher realms, and that there's more humans than there are devas, and there's more animals than there are humans, and so on. And so we find ourselves in some particular situation that's always changing. it's always evolving. It's never the same from moment to moment. And it's a convergence of factors, causal factors. And we have to first of all, operate from that point of view of calm, as I'm saying, but we also have to take responsibility for our situation. This is a pretty important principle that you're not going to make any real progress unless you take responsibility for your own mind states. There's a tendency of people to blame their circumstances or blame other people. He makes me so angry, I can't help myself. There are external causes. Someone may be yelling in your face, that's an external cause. But ultimately, the state of your own mind is your own responsibility. How do you react to that circumstance? We have to deal with the various situations we find ourselves in. And there are two kind of overarching principles that can be used as kind of guidelines for a properly lived life. This is an idea from ancient India that carried on into Buddhism, but it was there before it as well. The idea of Dharma and Artha, or in Pali is Dhamma and Artha. Now, Dhamma is the higher principle. It's the ultimate truth, the law, reality. But Artha is the way we conduct ourselves in our present circumstance. And the way the ancient Indians would think of this mostly in terms of caste. In your caste, you would have a particular Artha involved, whether you were a warrior or a trader or a Brahmin priest. That you would have certain duties and responsibilities to carry out. I gave a talk a few weeks ago on the Sagala Sutta, and we see that idea reflected over into the Buddhist teaching, not in terms of caste, but in terms of relationships. And it's a guide for how to live a layman's life. And it goes through all his various relationships. He's a father, he's a son, he's a friend, he's a student, he's a teacher, he's a worker or an employer, he's a husband, and his wife is also has her set of relationships. And it's like a network. Human society is like a network of these relationships. And in each relationship is defined in terms of responsibilities. This is quite a different way of thinking from both the pre-Buddhist Indian view in terms of castes, where you had fixed duties depending on your birth, and limitations. And it's also quite different from the modern way of thinking, which tends to be more in terms of rights, what rights you have in every situation. Whereas the way the Buddha expressed it was in terms of your responsibilities, which is your atta in each situation. The parent has the duty to guide and admonish and protect and nurture the child, and the child has the duty to listen to the parent and to support them in the old age and to make sacrifices for them after they're dead. And every set of relationships is like that. It's defined in terms of duties. So I think if you're fulfilling the various duties you have in your life, then you're living according to this principle of atta, and you'll find the contentment, which is quite different from the idea of just selfishly seeking your own optimal enjoyment and pleasure and what you have a right to enjoy. Instead, you try and smooth things out for the whole network of relationships by fulfilling your obligations. And then there's a sense of fulfillment. There's a sense of feeling worthwhile and useful. And this comes from the clear, calm center. This is where you find that calmness. You're just doing what needs to be done. Even in the midst of struggle and chaos, you just do what needs to be done. And at the eye of the storm, the mind is clear and calm and focused, just doing what it can. Another important, very important principle for finding calm and ease in the life is sila, the morality or the keeping of precepts. And the way the precepts are phrased in the Pali is sikapada samadhiyami, sikapadang samadhiyami, is I shall endeavor to undertake this training. So if you come from a background where your first exposure to rules of morality may have been like the Ten Commandments, there's a lot of overlap, of course, between the actual rules, but the principle is different. In something like the commandments and analogies in other religions, this is a set of rules imposed from a deity above, and it's like an admonishment: don't do this or you will be punished. Whereas the precepts are more like training rules. They're ways of developing the mind towards calm and peacefulness. Rather than think of them as commandments, think of them more like an owner's manual. If you got a piece of machinery, a car or a generator or something, you'll have an owner's manual that'll give you advice on when to change the oil and when to clean the air filter and so on. And you do that to keep your machine running properly. And precepts are like an owner's manual for a human form. That this is how you can live your life most harmoniously and peacefully and at ease. You train yourself in this way. And the precepts all of them are capable of refinement. You can keep them on a very, you should keep them on a very literal, obvious level. First precept, not killing. Second precept, not stealing, and so on. But take the second precept, for example, sadina dana veramani, I shall refrain from taking that which is not given. And obvious breach of the precept would be theft. But a refined understanding, you don't take what's not given, you don't take up someone's time, for example. This is a subtle form of taking what is not given. You don't take people for granted, and not killing. Refinement is not doing harm, not causing distress. That's the virtue of ahimsa, harmlessness, which is a very important path to peacefulness, finding peace in the mind by living harmlessly, not causing any destruction or distress in the world. Pass through the world harmlessly. Then you're at peace. Another related virtue to peacefulness is santuti, or contentedness, which has been called, I think it was Shantideva, the Mahayana writer, Middle Ages, who I think it was him, somebody of that ilk, said that contentedness is like the wish-fulfilling gem. This is something from Indian mythology. In Indian fables, the hero is often seeking the wish-fulfilling gem. It's some magical gem that if you hold it, whatever you wish for, you will receive. And the wonder is, if you're content, you already have the wish-fulfilling gem. Because if all you wish for is what you already have, all your wishes are fulfilled. This is also, to a very significant degree, going against the grain. Because the world teaches us to be acquisitive and greedy and desirous. you're supposed to be ambitious and better yourself and make lots of money and so on. And this is, considered a virtue in the world. I have heard that in the 1960s in Thailand, there was a political leader whose name I can't remember right now, but he was like the prime minister. He seized power in a military coup. It's common in Thailand, these things. And he wanted to modernize the country and introduce a more capitalistic economy, and industrialize and so on. And he felt that the Buddhist teachings were a hindrance to that. And he tried to get the monks to agree not to teach Sentuti. And the one well-known, well, the forest monks don't pay any attention to whatever comes out of Bangkok anyway, but the one sort of popular, well-known monk who refused to go along with this was Buddhadasa, and that's how he initially made his reputation. He refused to follow these edicts. But that prime minister wasn't really wrong in his thinking. That contentedness is not something that leads to an acquisitive, dynamic sort of economy, but it leads to peacefulness. It leads to everybody being content, and then you're content and you're happy. There's also something that's happened in a number of countries. I know I've heard this also from Thailand, but it's just happened elsewhere. People that were living in the countryside in villages, by World Bank standards or international standards, they were poverty stricken. But by realistic human standards, they were quite content and happy. They had plenty to eat. The environment of Thailand is very conducive to providing nourishment. They had shelter, as they built houses for themselves that were, in the tropics you don't need much for shelter. Just needed really a roof to keep the rain off. And they had enough of an economy to keep themselves in small luxuries. They had enough clothing, and so on. And so they felt themselves to be quite peaceful and at ease and happy until television came in. And when television was introduced, and at first in the early days of television in rural Thailand, it would be like one television in the village in a common hall, and people would come and watch it. They'd see all these shows about people in Bangkok living, in the cities and having cars and fancy apartments and fancy clothes and all this stuff, and they would start to feel discontented because we don't have that stuff. Yeah. And this is not a real lack, but an unfulfilled desire. And we have these desires in our mind for this or that, and not only for material objects, but for situations or whatever it might be. And this causes discontent in the mind, and this causes agitation and unhappiness. So the real advice is to find that place of calm, clear, peaceful centeredness. And there's multi-levels of benefits from that. In terms of living a harmonious, pleasant life is the first benefit. And the development of higher states of consciousness and meditation is the second benefit. But the highest benefit is the realization of nibbana, the unconditioned. And this is only possible to do when one is at peace. If the mind is in any way agitated, it'll miss it. It can't break free because it's still, in a sense, struggling. I remember hearing one of our other monks. I was Ajahn Sona. He was giving a talk, and he used the analogy of I'm trying to remember who it is. I think it's the Sioux, one of the Indian tribes, North American Indian tribes, that have a ghost dance ritual, which is a rather extreme practice that they do, where only the men do this. The warriors gather in a circle around a pole, and from the pole are hanging cords that end in a metal hook, and they stick the hook through the flesh of their breast and then dance around the pole, and then have to be tough and take the pain without showing a reaction. And in the end, the only way they get free from the hook is by completely surrendering and being completely relaxed and abandon all kind of struggle and hope of release, and just kind of lay back and the hook tears itself out. But as long as they're struggling and trying to ease it, then they can't get free. It's rather an extreme and kind of gruesome image, but those are often the most powerful ones, and this is kind of like our situation in samsara. We're hanging from these hooks, and as long as we struggle, we're not going to get free. So I think I'll stop there.